I never thought my life would change over a plate of lasagna. But that's exactly what happened on that cold October evening. As I rushed around the kitchen trying to prepare a last-minute dinner for unexpected guests, my hands trembled slightly while layering the pasta sheets. Ashley, my daughter-in-law, had forgotten to mention that her parents were coming over until just 2 hours ago. "Mom, they'll be here at 7. Ryan had called, his voice carrying that familiar tone of expectation. Not a request, not even a proper heads up, just another demand disguised as information. The same tone I'd heard for 30 years, ever since I'd brought him home from the hospital, wrapped in that beige coat I still kept in my closet. The marinara sauce bubbled on the stove as I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand. The house. My house, technically, though they'd long since made me feel like a guest, filled with the aroma of garlic and herbs. I'd paid the mortgage faithfully for decades, decorated every room with care, and maintained it all while working full-time at the insurance company. Now retired, I'd somehow become even more indispensable to their daily lives. Though increasingly invisible as a person, the doorbell chimed just as I was pulling the lasagna from the oven. Through the kitchen window, I could see Ashley's parents' luxury SUV parked in the driveway. Their voices drifted in, cheerful, loud, unconsciously entitled. I smoothed down my apron, checked my reflection in the microwave door, and carried the steaming dish to the dining room. "There she is!" Ashley's voice rang out with that artificial brightness she used for her social media videos. "Always right on time with dinner, aren't you?" I smiled, setting down the lasagna on the table I'd bought 20 years ago. The table where I'd helped Ryan with his homework, where we'd celebrated his college acceptance, where I'd later watched him and Ashley plan their wedding. Now it felt like just another prop in their carefully curated life. "Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, this is Ryan's mom," Ashley began, then paused with a glance at her husband. A smirk played at the corners of her perfectly lined lips. Though really, she's more like our unofficial housekeeper at this point. Cooking, cleaning, paying the bills. We'd be lost without her, wouldn't we, honey? The laughter that followed felt like shards of glass in my chest, but it was Ryan's chuckle, my son, my only child, the baby I'd cradled through countless nights, that finally broke something deep inside me. He didn't defend me, didn't even look uncomfortable, just laughed along as if his mother being reduced to hired help was the most natural joke in the world. I stood there, still holding the oven mitts, feeling the heat from the lasagna warming my legs through my dress. In that moment, watching them all share their little joke, something crystallized in my mind. I saw, with absolute clarity, what I had become in their eyes. More importantly, I saw what I had allowed myself to become. That night, after they'd eaten every bite of my lasagna and left their dishes for me to clean, I sat alone at the kitchen table, my hands, wrinkled but still strong, wrapped around a cup of cold tea. By dawn, I knew exactly what I had to do. The next morning, I moved through the house like a ghost, touching things I'd carefully chosen over the years. The pale blue, curtains in the living room, the antique mirror in the hallway, the collection of family photos that now felt like a museum of lost moments. Each step echoed with 3 decades of memories, both sweet and bitter. I found myself in Ryan's old room, where the wallpaper still showed faded patches where his posters had once hung. I remembered installing that wallpaper myself, perched on a ladder while 8-year-old Ryan handed me strips with solemn concentration. Back then, his eyes would follow me around the room with such pure love that sometimes it took my breath away. When had that gaze turned distant? When had I become a convenience instead of a mother? In my bedroom, I opened my closet and reached for the beige coat, The one I'd worn when I brought Ryan home from the hospital. It was outdated now, with slightly worn elbows, but it carried the weight of beginnings. I slipped it on, feeling its familiar embrace. Then I took out a small travel bag I'd packed in the pre-dawn hours and placed my essential documents inside. Birth certificate, social security card, bank statements. Downstairs, Ashley was still asleep, and Ryan had already left for what he claimed was another business meeting. I knew better now. Had known for months that he was unemployed, though he and Ashley maintained the facade of their successful lifestyle company. Moving quietly, I gathered the keys I'd accumulated over the years. Front door, back door, garage, mailbox. Each one felt heavy with finality. In the kitchen, my domain for so long, I wrote a brief note. No accusations, no dramatic declarations, just facts. The mortgage payment is due on the 15th. The property tax bill arrives next month. The water heater needs servicing soon. Good luck. I placed it on the counter next to the keys. The sound of movement upstairs made me pause. Ashley was awake. I could picture her morning routine, checking social media notifications, planning another staged photo shoot for her fictional lifestyle brand, preparing to present another perfectly curated lie to her followers. But I wouldn't be part of today's performance. Walking to the front door, I passed the dining room where last night's humiliation had unfolded. The table had been cleared, by me of course, and everything looked pristine, ready for another day of pretense. I touched the doorknob, remembering how many times I'd turned it over the years, letting in guests for Ryan's birthday parties, welcoming Ashley's family for holidays, opening it each morning to collect the newspaper. This time, when I turned I wasn't opening the door to let anyone in. I was opening it to let myself out. The morning air was crisp, carrying the first hint of autumn. From the porch, I could see Mrs. Henderson across the street, walking her dog. She waved, probably expecting to see me head out for groceries or errands, as I did most mornings. Instead, I walked to my car, the only thing here that was truly, unquestionably mine. As I pulled out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of Ashley in an upstairs window, phone in hand, probably already planning her next social media performance. She didn't wave. Maybe she didn't even notice, but for the first time in years, her indifference didn't hurt, because this time, I wasn't leaving to serve. I was leaving to save myself. Aunt Beatrice's apartment greeted me like a time capsule, all faded wallpaper and creaking floorboards. I hadn't been here since her funeral 5 years ago, when she'd left me this place in her will. Just in case, she'd written in her final letter, though I hadn't understood what she meant at the time. Now, standing in the dusty living room with my single bag, I wondered if she'd somehow known I'd need an escape route one day. The first few days passed in a blur of microwave soup and fitful naps on the old couch. The radiator clanked through the nights, a mechanical lullaby that couldn't quite drown out my thoughts. My phone remained silent. No calls from Ryan, no messages asking where I'd gone. The silence spoke volumes about how little my presence had meant to them, even as they'd depended on it so completely. I moved through the apartment like a ghost, touching things that held whispers of Beatrice's life. Her old nursing textbooks, a collection of pressed flowers between dictionary pages, ceramic figurines arranged on windowsills. She'd worked as a nurse at City General for 40 years, including the maternity ward where I'd given birth to Ryan. The thought made my throat tight. She'd been there that night, though I barely remembered her presence through the fog of labor. On the 4th day, I finally forced myself to venture out for proper groceries. The neighborhood had changed since Beatrice's time, but Morton's Market still stood on the corner, its green awning faded but welcoming. Inside, I filled my basket, mechanically. Bread, eggs, tea. basic supplies for my new life. The cashier, an elderly man with kind eyes, made small talk about the weather. It was the first real conversation I'd had since leaving, and I nearly cried when he wished me a good day. Back at the apartment, I decided it was time to properly settle in. I couldn't live forever with just the contents of my travel bag. The bedroom closet needed clearing to make space for the few clothes I'd brought, and that's when I found the old steamer trunk pushed against the back wall. It was heavy with decades of Beatrice's belongings. Old uniforms, paperwork from her nursing days, photographs of colleagues I'd never met. As I sorted through the items, a manila envelope slipped from between two folders, landing face up on the floor. My name was written across it in Beatrice's precise handwriting, dated 30 years ago, just months after Ryan's birth. My hands trembled as I picked it up, noticing how the seal had yellowed with age but remained unbroken. Inside, I found several documents, hospital records, legal papers, and beneath them all, a photograph that made my heart stop. A baby, not more than a day old, with a hospital bracelet reading, Nathan Caldwell. The date matched Ryan's birthday, but it was the accompanying letter, written in Beatrice's familiar script, that would shatter my world completely. My dearest Helen, if you're reading this, I've failed to find the courage to tell you in person. What I witnessed that night in the maternity ward has haunted me for years. There was a confusion with the identification bands, a simple mistake in the chaos of a busy night shift. I only realized what had happened when I checked the records weeks later, and by then, the letter trembled in my hands as my vision blurred. The radiator chose that moment to clank to life, making me jump. Outside, a car horn honked, and somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's television droned on. But all I could hear was the rushing in my ears as I read and reread the documents that suggested the unthinkable. The baby I'd brought home that night, the one I'd raised, loved, and just walked away from, might not have been my biological son. I sank to the floor among the scattered papers, my back against the closet door. The room seemed to spin as 30 years of memory suddenly took on a new, uncertain light. All those times I'd wondered why Ryan felt so emotionally distant, why our connection seemed to require so much effort. Had some deep, cellular knowledge been trying to tell us something? And somewhere out there was another man, this Nathan Caldwell, living a life that was meant to be intertwined with mine. Did he ever feel that something was missing? Did his mother ever look at him and feel an inexplicable disconnect, the way I sometimes had with Ryan? As night fell, I remained on the floor, surrounded by the evidence of a truth that would change everything. The apartment's shadows lengthened, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled. Each chime seemed to mark the death of what I'd thought was my reality, and the birth of something entirely new. Sleep eluded me that night as I pieced together the puzzle Beatrice had left behind. The documents painted a clear picture. Nathan Caldwell had been born just hours before Ryan, to a mother named Margaret Caldwell. Somewhere in the rushed hours of that busy night, in the fluorescent-lit halls of City General, two babies' identification bands had been switched. One simple mistake had altered the course of 4 lives forever. Morning found me at my laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. A simple search for Nathan Caldwell yielded thousands of results, but one caught my eye immediately. Caldwell Books, a local independent bookstore just 15 blocks from where I sat. The website showed a storefront painted in deep forest green, with brass fixtures and window displays of leather-bound classics. And there, on the About Us page, was a photo that made my heart skip. Nathan Caldwell stood among his bookshelves, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle smile that somehow mirrored my own. He had my mother's high cheekbones, my grandfather's warm brown eyes. The resemblance was subtle but unmistakable. The kind that normally gets dismissed as coincidence, unless you're holding proof to the contrary in your trembling hands. I spent hours studying that photo, noting every detail. The way he tilted his head slightly when he smiled, how his hands rested on the books with a careful tenderness. He looked kind, thoughtful. Everything Ryan had struggled to be despite my best efforts to nurture those qualities in him. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Ryan and Ashley had been crafting their artificial lifestyle brand, my biological son had built something real and tangible, a sanctuary for literature and learning. The contrast felt like a cosmic joke, or perhaps a testament to the power of nature over nurture. Later that afternoon, I found myself walking past Caldwell Books, my heart thundering in my chest. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of Nathan, helping an elderly customer reach a book on a high shelf. His movements were unhurried, considerate. I watched him recommend titles to browsers, engage in animated discussions about authors I couldn't hear through the glass. Every gesture, every expression seemed to reveal another piece of myself reflected back at me. But I couldn't bring myself to go in. Not yet. This truth was too enormous, too life-altering to simply walk in and announce over the fiction section. Besides, I had another truth to confront first. Back at the apartment, I opened my banking app and stared at the mortgage, payments I'd been making on the house where Ryan and Ashley lived. Without my monthly contributions, they wouldn't be able to maintain their carefully constructed facade for long. The thought should have brought me satisfaction, but instead I felt a complex mix of guilt and resolution. My phone buzzed, the first message from Ryan in 5 days. "Mom, where are you? Ashley's parents are coming for dinner again this weekend." No mention of concern for my whereabouts, no acknowledgement of my absence. Just another demand disguised as information. I left it unanswered and pulled out a notebook, one of those marbled composition books Beatrice had kept in her desk. On the first page, I began to write, trying to make sense of the tangled threads of love, obligation, and identity that had brought me to this moment. The words flowed like a river breaking through a dam. I raised a son who wasn't mine, while somewhere across town, another woman raised my child. We all lived in a story we didn't know we were telling. Now it's time to write a new one. Outside, my window the city continued its endless rhythm, unaware that in this quiet apartment, worlds were shifting, truths were emerging, and a woman who had spent her life giving was finally learning how to take back. The second notebook I bought was black, practical, with a sturdy spiral binding, perfect for the kind of investigation I was planning. While the marbled composition book held my personal reflections, this one would document facts, figures, and the unraveling of carefully constructed lies. My first entry was simple: Ashley Rise Co., founded 2023. Below it, I began listing observations from my years of unwitting involvement in their scheme. The company that Ryan claimed to help manage was little more than a social media facade, staged photos in rented spaces, borrowed luxury cars, positioned just so in driveways, catered meals presented as Ashley's home cooking. I'd been the silent witness to it all, watching from behind the scenes as they crafted their perfect life out of smoke and mirrors. But now, with professional distance and a retired insurance adjuster's eye for detail, I could see the holes in their narrative. The mortgage payments I'd been making, the utility bills I'd covered, all of it had funded their illusion while they poured money into maintaining appearances. A quick check of public records confirmed my suspicions. Ryan hadn't been employed at Thompson and Garcia Financial for 6 months, though his LinkedIn profile still listed him as Senior Investment Manager. Between these revelations, I allowed myself carefully timed visits to Caldwell Books. I'd go in during busy hours, browse the poetry section, sometimes buy a slim volume I knew I'd never read. Nathan would often be there, recommending books, with quiet enthusiasm or discussing literature with customers. One day he helped me find a collection of Mary Oliver's works, and our fingers brushed as he handed me the book. That momentary contact sent a jolt through my system. Did he feel it too? Some cellular recognition of what we were to each other? "You have a wonderful selection," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Thank you." He smiled, adjusting his glasses. I tried to create the kind of space I would have loved as a child. Somewhere quiet, safe, full of possibilities. The comment nearly undid me. I'd tried to create that same environment for Ryan, never knowing that somewhere across town. Nathan had been seeking it himself. I hurried out after paying, the book clutched to my chest like a shield. That evening, my phone lit up with a text from Ashley. The refinancing application was rejected. They said they need your signature since you're the primary owner. Call me Asapi. No greeting, no acknowledgement of my absence. Just another demand. I added it to my black notebook. Attempted refinancing without consent. October 17th. The next day, I visited Patricia Chen, a young attorney recommended by my former co-worker. Her office was modest but organized, much like her approach to our conversation. She listened without judgment as I laid out my situation. The house, the fraudulent business, the years of financial support. "Before we discuss the house," Patricia said, straightening a stack of papers, "I want to make sure you understand your options regarding the other matter." She meant Nathan, the hospital records, the switch. I'd shared everything with her, needing legal clarity before proceeding. DNA testing would be straightforward, she continued. "But have you considered the implications for everyone involved?" I had. Every night for weeks I'd considered little else. The marbled notebook was filled with my circular reasoning. The right to know versus the pain of disruption. Truth versus stability. Nature versus nurture. But watching Nathan in his bookstore had clarified something for me. This wasn't just about DNA or legal rights. It was about recognition, about understanding why some pieces of my life had never quite fit together. "I need to know," I told Patricia. "But first, I need to handle the immediate situation." She nodded, pulling out a fresh legal pad. "Then, let's start with the house. You mentioned having documentation of your payments?" I opened my black notebook, revealing pages of meticulous records. Patricia's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, "I think it's time we helped you reclaim what's yours." As I left her office, I passed a mother and young son in the waiting room. The boy was reading a book, his mother's arm around his shoulders. The sight made my heart ache, but not in the way it once would have. Instead of loss, I felt possibility, the chance to understand a connection I'd missed, even as I severed one that had bound me for too long. That night, I added a new entry to my marbled notebook. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't holding on. It's letting go with open eyes and an open heart, ready to catch whatever falls into the space you've cleared. Patricia's recommendation to hire Greg Sullivan, a social media analytics consultant, proved invaluable. He sat across from me in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the bookstore, his laptop open to Ashley's carefully curated Instagram feed. His findings confirmed what I'd suspected but couldn't prove. Bought followers, fake engagement, manufactured statistics. "See these lifestyle photos?" Greg pointed to images of Ashley in what appeared to be a luxury penthouse. "It's a rental unit used for influencer shoots, $200 per hour." He scrolled through more evidence, bot-generated comments, paid partnerships with shell companies, circular marketing schemes that existed only on screen. I wrote everything in my black notebook, each entry another nail in the coffin of their illusion. The same hands that had once packed Ryan's school lunches now documented his complicity in fraud. The parents, I said to Greg, thinking of Ashley's mother and father, still believing their daughter was a successful entrepreneur. Can you prepare something they'd understand? He nodded, understanding my intention. I'll put together a report. Nothing technical, just clear evidence of the deception. Sometimes the simplest truths hit hardest. Between meetings with Greg and Patricia, I continued my careful orbit of Nathan's bookstore. I'd learned his schedule, the quiet hours when he'd be most likely to chat. We discussed poetry, then novels, then life itself. Each conversation was a thread connecting us, though he didn't know how tightly we were already bound. "You remind me of someone," he said one rainy afternoon, as I helped him reorganize the classics section. "I can't quite place it." I nearly dropped the copy of Jane Eyre I was holding. "Oh." My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "Maybe it's just that you feel familiar," he continued, shelving books with careful precision. "Like we've known each other in some other context." The irony of his words made my hands shake. We had known each other, in the most primal sense, for exactly 37 minutes before life pulled us apart. I thought of the hospital records in my apartment, the DNA test kit waiting in my dresser drawer, the truth hovering like an unspoken word between us. "I get that feeling too," I managed to say. Later that day, Greg's report arrived in my email. It was devastating in its simplicity. Screenshots, data, undeniable evidence of Ashley's elaborate deception. I forwarded it to her parents with a brief note: "You should know what your investment is funding." Then I blocked both Ryan and Ashley's numbers, knowing the explosion would come soon enough. That evening I sat in my slowly transforming apartment, surrounded by the books I'd bought from Nathan's store. Each one had been an excuse to see him, to study his mannerisms, to search for echoes of myself or my parents in his features. The room no longer felt like Aunt Beatrice's space. I'd added a soft reading lamp, a new throw blanket, small touches that made it mine. My marbled notebook lay open on the coffee table. In it, I'd written about the strange double life I was living, gathering evidence against the son I'd raised while quietly getting to know the son I'd lost. Both actions felt like different forms of love. One tough enough to demand truth, the other patient enough to wait for the right moment. A notification lit up my tablet. Ashley's perfectly curated Instagram feed had gone dark. Her last post, a flawless breakfast spread I knew had been photographed in a rented kitchen, now showed 0 likes. The carefully constructed house of cards was beginning to fall. I should have felt triumph, but instead I felt a profound sadness for all the energy they'd poured into appearing successful rather than building something real. I thought of Nathan's bookstore, with its worn wooden floors and carefully chosen inventory. A business built on passion and authenticity rather than illusion. In my black notebook, I made one final entry for the day. Sometimes destruction is necessary for truth to emerge. The same fire that burns away lies can light the way forward. Then I picked up my phone and, for the first time, called Patricia about starting the DNA testing process. It was time for all truths to come to light. The collapse of Ashley's social media empire was swift and merciless. Within days of Greg's report reaching her parents, her perfectly filtered world began to crumble. Sponsored posts disappeared, partnerships evaporated, and her 100,000 followers dwindled to a mere fraction as bot accounts were purged. I watched it happen from behind my block settings, each notification from Greg confirming another piece of the facade falling, away. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from unknown numbers, Ryan trying different phones to reach me. I let them all go to voicemail, each message more desperate than the last. "Mom, what did you do? We need to talk. Everything's falling apart." The Ryan who had laughed at my humiliation over lasagna was gone, replaced by a man facing the consequences of his choices for the first time. I listened to each message exactly once, noting the progression in my black notebook. There was a pattern to his panic. First blame, then anger, and finally, in the latest messages, something approaching, genuine fear. The mortgage payment was due in 3 days, and without my contribution, they had no way to make it. "They've started parking their car 3 blocks away," my old neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, texted me. "I think they're avoiding the repo man." I hadn't asked her to keep me informed, but she'd always had a keen eye for neighborhood drama. I added this detail to my notebook, another piece of the unraveling. Between monitoring the collapse of Ryan and Ashley's pretense, I spent more time at Caldwell Books. Nathan had begun saving interesting titles for me, learning my taste with an intuition that made my heart ache. "I thought of you when this came in," he'd say, holding out a volume of Mary Oliver or Jane Hirschfield, poets who wrote about nature and transformation. Did he somehow sense that I was going through my own metamorphosis? One quiet afternoon, as rain drummed against the bookstore's windows, Nathan made us tea in his small office. The space was cluttered with review copies and ordering catalogs, but he cleared a spot for me on an old leather armchair. "I've been meaning to ask," he said, stirring honey into his cup. "Would you be interested in helping me start a poetry reading group? There's something about the way you discuss literature. You have a gift for getting to the heart of things." The invitation nearly undid me. Here was my son, my biological son, offering me a place in his world, not knowing who I was. The DNA test results sat in my email inbox, unopened. Patricia had confirmed their arrival that morning, but I hadn't found the courage to look yet. "I'd love to," I heard myself say, and his smile, so like my father's, made me grip my teacup tighter. Back at my apartment that evening, I found an envelope had been slipped under my door. Inside was a letter from Ashley's mother. "How dare you destroy my daughter's business? She worked so hard to build her brand. If you think exposing her methods will bring Ryan back to you, you're sadly mistaken. Some mothers just don't know when to let go." I added the letter to my black notebook, noting how she'd focused on the destruction of the lie rather than the lie itself. In my marbled notebook, I wrote, "We become complicit in our children's deceptions when we choose comfort over truth. But real love sometimes means being willing to break both their hearts and our own." The DNA test results still waited in my inbox, their unopened status a weight on my conscience. I knew that once I opened them, I would be obligated to act. The truth would demand to be spoken. But first, I needed to handle the immediate crisis. I called Patricia. "I'm ready to move forward with the house sale," I told her, "and I want to do it before they can attempt any legal maneuvers of their own." "Good timing," she replied. "I've drawn up the papers. But Helen, are you sure you don't want to tell Ryan about Nathan first? It might help him understand why you're doing all this." I looked at the books scattered around my apartment, each one a bridge between Nathan and me. Each conversation we'd had a piece of the connection we were building without his knowledge. "No," I said finally. "These are separate truths. He needs to face one before he can handle the other." After hanging up, I sat at my small kitchen table, where I'd laid out both notebooks. In the black one, evidence of deception and its consequences. In the marbled one, the story of a mother finding her way back to herself. and to a son she never knew she lost. Between them sat my laptop, the DNA test results waiting like a key to a door I wasn't quite ready to open. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the late evening sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across my floor. Somewhere across town, Ryan and Ashley were watching their carefully constructed world collapse. And somewhere much closer, in a green-painted bookstore, Nathan was probably shelving books, unaware that his life was about to change as profoundly as mine had the day I found Beatrice's letter. I opened my email. The DNA test results glowed on my screen with clinical certainty, 99.9% probability of maternal relation. The scientific confirmation of what Beatrice's letters had suggested hit me with unexpected force. I sat there, staring at the numbers and technical terms, feeling the weight of 3 decades of misdirected lives settling around me. My hands shook as I printed the results, adding them to a growing file of documents. Beatrice's letters, the original hospital records, the legal paperwork Patricia had prepared. Together they told a story of mistakes and missed connections, of biology and belonging, of truth buried beneath years of assumption and routine. The next morning, I arrived at Caldwell Books earlier than usual. Nathan was unpacking a shipment of new releases, his movements careful and methodical. He smiled when he saw me, pushing his glasses up with the same unconscious gesture I'd seen in photos of my father. "Perfect timing," he said, pulling a book from the box. "This just came in, signed first edition of Ocean Vuong. I thought you might want first dibs." I took the book, our fingers brushing again. How many small moments like this had we missed? Over the years, how many conversations, shared jokes, quiet understandings had been stolen from us by a simple hospital mix-up. "I've been thinking about your poetry group idea," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "What if we made it more than just readings? Maybe a space for people to share their own stories." His eyes lit up. "Like a community storytelling circle? That's brilliant." He gestured to the store's back room. "I've been wanting to renovate that space anyway. Make it cozier, more welcoming." We spent the next hour planning, sketching ideas on the back of a receipt. Nathan talked about his vision for the store as more than just a business, a sanctuary for people seeking connection through literature. Every word he spoke showed me pieces of myself I'd never seen, reflected in Ryan. Back at my apartment, I found 3 more missed calls from Ryan and a text that cut through my defenses. "Mom, please. I know we messed up, but you're still my mother." Was I? The DNA results in my drawer argued otherwise, but 30 years of love, worry, and care couldn't be undone by science alone. I opened my marbled notebook and wrote, "Maybe motherhood isn't just biology or memory or choice. Maybe it's all of these things wrapped together in a knot too complex to untangle." Patricia called with updates about the house sale. "The paperwork's ready," she said. "But there's something else. Ryan's been asking questions about your aunt's old apartment. He might know where you are." I thanked her and added this information to my black notebook. The confrontation I'd been preparing for was coming sooner rather than later. But first, I had another task to complete. I called Greg for one final favor, a deep background check on the Caldwell family. I needed to understand the life Nathan had lived, the mother who had raised him, the circumstances that had shaped him into the thoughtful man who recommended poetry to strangers. The report arrived that evening. Margaret Caldwell, retired high school English teacher, widow. She'd raised Nathan alone after her husband's early death, supporting them by teaching extra classes and selling used books from their garage. The humble beginnings of what would become Caldwell Books. I sat with this information, feeling a complex mix of gratitude and grief. Margaret had given Nathan a life filled with books and learning, had nurtured the same loves I would have encouraged. In some strange way, he'd ended up exactly where he should be, even if he'd taken a different path to get there. A knock at my door startled me from these thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Ryan standing in the hallway, his appearance more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. The carefully maintained image he'd hidden behind was gone, replaced by something raw and desperate. I looked at the DNA results. On my desk, the 2 notebooks that chronicled my journey to this moment. The borrowed library book from Nathan's store sitting on my coffee table. All these threads of truth were about to intersect. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. Ryan stood in my doorway, the careful facade of success stripped away. His expensive shirt was wrinkled, his hair uncombed. The polished veneer he'd maintained for Ashley's social media posts had crumbled, revealing something more honest beneath. "You've been here the whole time?" His voice cracked as he looked past me into Aunt Beatrice's apartment. 3 blocks from our house? "Your house," I corrected quietly, stepping aside to let him in. "The house I paid for." He moved into the living room like a stranger, taking in the changes I'd made. The new reading lamp, the books scattered on every surface, the 2 notebooks on the coffee table. His eyes lingered on a receipt from Caldwell Books. "Why did you do it?" he asked, turning to face me. "Why did you send that report to Ashley's parents? Everything we built was a lie," I finished. "A lie I funded while you treated me like hired help." "That dinner. It was just a joke, Mom. Ashley gets carried away sometimes with her social media personality, you know that. We didn't mean to hurt me, to humiliate me, to take advantage of every sacrifice I've made." The words I'd written in my marbled notebook came flowing out, stronger for having been examined and understood. "You didn't mean to, Ryan. You just didn't care enough not to." He sank onto the couch, deflated. "The bank called about the mortgage. Ashley's parents have cut us off. Her followers are calling her a fraud. My LinkedIn. Everyone knows I've been lying about my job." He looked up at me, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares. "Help us fix this, Mom, please." In that moment, I almost wavered, the instinct to protect him, to solve his problems, to sacrifice myself for his comfort. It rose up like muscle memory. But then my eyes fell on the DNA results sitting on my desk, and I felt a different kind of clarity. "I can't fix this, Ryan, and I won't." What's that supposed to mean? I picked up the hospital records, the DNA results, Beatrice's letter. "There's something you need to know. Something I only recently learned myself. As I explained about the hospital mix-up, about Beatrice's discovery, about the DNA test confirming it all, Ryan's face went through a series of transformations. Disbelief, anger, confusion, fear. He grabbed the papers, reading and rereading, them as if the words might change. "This is why," he finally asked, his voice hollow. "This is why you're abandoning us? Because some test says I'm not really yours?" "No," I said firmly, sitting across from him. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm choosing myself. The truth about your birth? That's separate. That's something we both need to understand and process. But my decision to stop enabling the lies, to stop being used, that's about self-respect." "Does he know?" Ryan gestured to the Caldwell Books receipt. "This other son. Have you told him?" "Not yet. I needed to handle this first, to make sure you understood why things have to change." Ryan stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. "Change? Everything's already changed. Ashley's business is ruined. We're about to lose the house. And now you're telling me I'm not even your son. You were my son for 30 years. Ryan, I loved you, raised you, gave you everything I had. But somewhere along the way, you and Ashley decided that wasn't enough. You needed a bigger story, a perfect narrative to present to the world. And you used me as a prop in that story. We were building something, he protested, but the words sounded hollow even to him. No, I said gently. You were pretending to build something. There's a difference. Nathan, he built something real. A bookstore, a community, without pretense or performance. Ryan flinched at Nathan's name. So that's it? You're trading up for a better son? The cruelty of the comment hung in the air between us. I took a deep breath, remembering what I'd written in my notebook about the difference between reactive anger and considered truth. I'm not trading anything, I said quietly. I'm adding truth to a life that's had too little of it. The house will be sold. Your debts are your own now. And when you're ready, really ready, to have an honest relationship with me, one based on mutual respect rather than exploitation, I'll be here. And if I'm never ready, then that will be your choice, just as this is mine. He stood by the door for a long moment, looking lost in a way that made my heart ache. But I stayed in my chair, letting him find his own way out. Sometimes love means letting someone face the consequences of their choices, even when every instinct screams to shield them. After he left, I opened my marbled notebook and wrote, "The hardest truth isn't learning that your child isn't yours. It's accepting that sometimes the deepest love isn't enough to make them see you as human." The morning after Ryan's visit, I walked to Caldwell Books with a different purpose. The familiar green storefront looked both welcoming and daunting, a doorway to another life-changing conversation. Inside, Nathan was setting up a new display of poetry collections, his movements precise and thoughtful. "You're early," he smiled, adjusting his glasses. "I was just about to call you. The renovation plans for the reading room came in. Want to take a look?" I followed him to his office, where blueprints were spread across his desk. He'd been talking about the next chapter, his vision for transforming the store's back room into a community space. Watching him trace the planned changes with his finger, his enthusiasm genuine and unaffected, I realized how different he was from Ryan. Where my raised son had created illusions, my birth son built real things, brick by brick, book by book. "Nathan," I said softly, "before we look at the plans, there's something I need to show you." I opened my bag and took out a carefully organized folder. The same documents I'd shown Ryan, but with additions. Photos of myself at Nathan's age, my parents' pictures, medical records showing our shared genetic markers. I'd spent hours arranging them in a sequence that would tell our story gently, clearly, irrefutably. "What's this?" he asked, taking the folder. "A truth that Aunt Beatrice, a nurse who was there the night you were born, carried with her for 30 years. My voice remained steady, though my hands trembled. "Please take your time reading it." I watched as he went through the documents, his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief to something deeper, more complex. When he reached the DNA results, he sat down heavily in his chair, papers scattered across his desk like fallen leaves. "I always felt..." He started, then stopped, removing his glasses to rub his eyes. "Mom, Margaret, she loved me completely, but there was something, a disconnect we could never quite explain." He looked up at me, really looked, as if seeing me for the first time. "Your eyes, they're exactly like mine." "Like your grandfather's?" I said softly, showing him a photo of my father. He was a literature professor, used to read poetry to me every night before bed. Nathan's laugh was shaky. I did the same thing with my cat all through college. Friends thought I was crazy. He touched the DNA results gently. Does my mother know? Margaret? Not yet. I wanted you to be the first to know after. I hesitated, then decided he deserved the whole truth. After Ryan. The son you raised? Nathan said, understanding dawning. Is he struggling with this truth, among others? I didn't elaborate on Ryan's situation. Those were his stories to share or keep. Nathan stood and walked to his office window, looking out at the quiet morning street. The silence stretched between us, filled with 30 years of missed moments and unknown connections. I used to imagine sometimes, he said finally, what it would be like to run this store with my mother. When I was renovating, making plans for the future, there were moments I'd turn to share an idea and feel this absence. He turned back to me. And now here you are, helping me plan the reading room, suggesting community storytelling circles. Exactly the kind of thing I'd always hoped to do. I'm not trying to replace Margaret, I said quickly. She raised you, loved you, made you who you are. I'm just hoping to know me, he finished, the way I find myself wanting to know you. He picked up one of the poetry books from his desk, Mary Oliver, the one he'd recommended weeks ago. There's a line in here about how the world offers itself to your imagination. I never expected it to offer something like this. I opened my marbled notebook, which I'd brought along, and showed him my entries about our conversations, my observations of him, my growing understanding of our connection. I've been trying to know you slowly, carefully, learning you through the books you love, the way you treat your customers, the dreams you have for this place. Nathan sat back down, putting his glasses back on. The gesture was so familiar. I'd done it countless times myself when gathering thoughts. I have questions, he said. Probably more than I even know right now. And I'll need time to process this, to talk to Margaret, to understand what it means for all of us. Of course, I nodded. We have time. He looked at the blueprints for the reading room, then back at me. But maybe while I process everything, we could still work on this together. Keep building something real. I felt tears threaten but held them back. I'd like that very much. As if on cue, the store's bell chimed, the first customer of the day. Nathan stood straightening his shirt. Would you mind watching the register while I help them? Afterward, we could get coffee, talk more. I'd like that too, I said, understanding this for what it was. Not just a practical request, but an invitation to be part of his daily life, to start building our relationship in small, genuine moments. As he left the office, I added one line to my notebook. Sometimes the truest forms of love are built in the quiet spaces between revelations, in the simple act of choosing to move forward together, one page at a time. Margaret Caldwell arrived at the bookstore on a Tuesday afternoon, her silver hair neatly styled and her posture straight, despite her evident nervousness. Nathan had told her everything the day before, and she'd requested this meeting. Neutral, ground in the store's newly renovated reading room. I recognized her immediately from Greg's background report photos, but nothing had prepared me for the reality of meeting the woman who had raised my biological son. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that reminded me of Aunt Beatrice. I brought something, Margaret said after the initial awkward introductions. She pulled out a photo album, worn at the edges from frequent handling. I thought you might want to know. Nathan sat between us as Margaret opened the album. There he was. First steps, school plays, graduation. All the moments I'd missed, carefully preserved by another mother's loving hands. My throat tightened as I saw him in a cap and gown, accepting his English degree. Just like my father had. He always loved books, Margaret said softly. I used to find him reading under the covers with a flashlight, just like I did at his age. Still do sometimes, Nathan admitted, and we all laughed, breaking the tension. I opened my own bag and brought out my marbled notebook. I've been writing about him, I explained to Margaret, since I found out. The little things I recognized, the connections I couldn't explain until I knew the truth. Margaret touched the notebook gently. May I? I nodded and she read a few entries, her eyes filling with tears. You saw him, she said. Really saw him. Even before you knew. You raised an extraordinary man, I told her. I want you to know, I'm not here to take anything away from that. And I want you to know, Margaret replied, that there's room for both of us in his life. Different kinds of love don't diminish each other. Nathan, who had been quietly watching this exchange, suddenly stood and went to the poetry section. He returned with 3 copies of the same book, Mary Oliver's Evidence. For both my mothers, he said, handing us each a copy. And one for me. Maybe we could read together sometimes? The simplicity of the gesture, the way he was trying to build bridges between his 2 worlds, moved me deeply. Margaret opened her copy, running her finger along the first page. There are things you can't reach, she read aloud, but you can reach out to them all day long. First Things. Nathan identified the poem. One of my favorites. We spent the next hour sharing stories, passing the photo album back and forth, each of us adding pieces to the mosaic of Nathan's life. It wasn't perfect or complete, but it was honest. 3 people learning to create something new from an old mistake. As we prepared to leave, Margaret touched my arm. Thank you, she said, for giving him the love of words. Even before you knew him, you gave him that. I looked at Nathan, arranging books for tomorrow's poetry circle, and felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. Some gifts, it seemed, could find their way home, even across decades of separation. The sale of the house closed on a crisp autumn morning. I signed the final papers in Patricia's office, my signature steady and sure. A portion of the proceeds would go into a trust for Ryan, not enough to maintain his artificial lifestyle, but sufficient to give him a fresh start if he chose to take it. Through Mrs. Henderson's updates, I knew Ryan and Ashley had moved into a small apartment across town. Ashley's social media accounts remained dormant, and Ryan had finally updated his LinkedIn to reflect his actual employment status. Seeking new opportunities. It wasn't the story they'd wanted to tell, but it was true. They're asking about you, Mrs. Henderson texted. Seemed different, humbler. I added her message to my black notebook, which now served as a chronicle of transformation rather than investigation. The last entry documented Ashley's first real job interview. At a local marketing firm starting from the bottom, no pretense required. That evening, I was helping Nathan organize books for the store's first community storytelling circle when my phone buzzed. Ryan's number. I'd unblocked it weeks ago, but hadn't heard from him until now. Hello. My voice echoed in the empty bookstore. Mom. Ryan sounded different, clearer, more present. We've been doing a lot of thinking. Ashley and I, we're seeing a counselor, learning to live honestly. He paused. I miss you. Nathan, sensing the importance of the call, squeezed my shoulder and moved to the front of the store, giving me privacy among the shelves of poetry and prose. I miss you too, I said, and meant it. The trust fund. That was you, wasn't it? Making sure we'd be okay? Yes. A long silence followed. I've met him, Ryan finally said. Nathan, not officially, but I went to one of his poetry readings, watched you two together. You seem happy. I am, I admitted. But that doesn't mean I've stopped loving you, Ryan. I know. That's what the counselor helped me understand. Love isn't a competition, and DNA. It's not what makes a mother. His voice cracked slightly. Your actions made you my mother. I just wish I'd seen that sooner. We talked for a few more minutes, making tentative plans to meet for coffee next week. Nothing was resolved completely, but something had shifted, like a book being placed back on its proper shelf. After hanging up, I found Nathan arranging chairs in a circle. The reading room looked transformed. Soft lighting, comfortable seating, walls lined with books that promised new beginnings. Tomorrow, people would gather here to share their stories of change and redemption. Everything okay? Nathan asked, adjusting his glasses. I showed him the final entries in both my notebooks. The black one chronicling Ryan's journey toward honesty. The marbled one capturing my own path to wholeness. I think, I said carefully, everything is finding its right place. Nathan smiled, reaching for a book of poems. Should we practice for tomorrow? I thought we could start with Oliver's The Journey. You know, the one about finally doing what you have to do. I sat down in one of the circle's chairs, feeling the rightness of this moment, this place, this new chapter of life. Yes, I said. Let's begin. The next chapter reading room had become more than just a space for poetry circles. Under the warm glow of vintage lamps Nathan and I had carefully selected, people gathered 3 times a week to share their stories of transformation. The old armchairs, arranged in a welcoming circle, had heard the tales of reinvention, forgiveness, and second chances. I was arranging fresh flowers on the small side table, a Tuesday ritual I developed, when Eleanor Sharp first walked in. She was elegant in her 70s with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. She picked up the sign-in sheet for our evening session. Stories of unexpected connections. I have one of those, she said, her voice carrying a weight of unspoken meaning. As she signed her name, she added, though I've never told it publicly. That evening, Eleanor shared her story with our group. She'd raised a son who, like Ryan, had been switched at birth, a discovery made too late to change anything. Her voice trembled as she described the moment she'd learned the truth, the years of wondering about her biological child, the complex love she felt for the son she'd raised. I thought I was alone in this experience, she said, looking directly at me. Until I read about you in the local paper, the woman who found her truth and built something beautiful from it. The article she referenced had been small, just a human interest piece about our storytelling circles. But it had mentioned my journey, the hospital mix-up, the 2 sons. I hadn't expected it to resonate so deeply with others. After the session, Eleanor lingered. We should start a support group, she suggested, for mothers like us, women who've lived this particular kind of complexity. Nathan, who'd been shelving books nearby, joined our conversation. You could use the room whenever you need it, he offered. Maybe combine it with the poetry circles sometimes. words can heal in unexpected ways. The idea took root quickly. Within weeks, we had a small but dedicated group of women who met to share their experiences with family complications, identity discoveries, and the courage to face difficult truths. We called ourselves the Tapestry Group, acknowledging how our lives had become interwoven in unexpected patterns. Ryan attended one of these sessions, sitting quietly in the back. He listened as Eleanor and others shared their stories, as I read Mary Oliver poems about transformation, as Nathan facilitated discussions about identity and belonging. Afterward, he helped us stack chairs and organize books. "I understand better now," he said softly, running his hand along a shelf of poetry. "Why you needed to tell the truth. Why this place means so much to you." Ashley came to the next session, her first public appearance since her social media empire's collapse. She spoke hesitantly about learning to live without filters, about finding value in authenticity. The group welcomed her story without judgment, recognizing another thread in our collective tapestry. Margaret often joined us too, bringing her own perspective on motherhood's many forms. She and I had developed a friendship based on our shared love for Nathan and our understanding that family could expand in beautiful, unexpected ways. That evening, closing the store together, Nathan showed me his latest renovation plans. "I think," he said, "we should call this whole section Mother's Stories. Not just for our group, but for anyone seeking to understand family in all its complexity." I opened my marbled notebook, its pages now filled with not just my journey, but the echoes of many others. "Yes," I wrote, "because sometimes the truest family is the one we build from understanding each other's hearts." A small publishing house in the city had taken interest in my notebooks. Home to Myself, Quiet Truth, and New Starts would be, released in spring, a memoir told through the lens of both the black and marbled notebooks. The editor said my story of transformation, of finding truth without vengeance, had touched something deep in early readers. The book launch would be held at Caldwell Books, of course. Nathan had insisted, pointing out how perfectly it aligned with our community storytelling mission. The reading room, now expanded to include a small cafe corner, was prepared. For the event, chairs arranged in intimate clusters rather than formal rows. On the morning of the launch, I arrived early to find Ryan helping Nathan set up. They moved around each other with a careful courtesy that had developed over months of small interactions. Ashley was there too, arranging refreshments she'd made herself. Real food this time, not staged for photos, but created with genuine care. "The lemon bars are Grandma's recipe," she told me, and I recognized this offering for what it was. A bridge between our old life and the new one we were all building. Margaret arrived carrying a vintage teapot she'd found at an antique store. "For the cafe corner," she said, hugging me. "Every good story needs the perfect cup of tea to go with it." Eleanor came soon after, bringing other members of the Tapestry Group, each carrying a book they'd found meaningful in their own journeys. As guests began to arrive, I took a moment to stand in the center of the room, absorbing the scene. The shelves Nathan and I had carefully curated with books about family, identity, and transformation. The comfortable chairs where so many stories had been shared. The wall of photographs showing our growing community, not posed for social media, but captured in genuine moments of connection. My 2 notebooks sat on the podium, their pages holding the story of how one truth had led to another, how courage had carved a path to authenticity. But looking around, I realized the real story wasn't just in those pages. It was here, in this room full of people who had chosen to face their own truths. Nathan approached the podium to introduce me, adjusting his glasses in that familiar way that still made my heart warm. Ryan sat in the front row beside Margaret, both of them ready to support another chapter in our unusual family story. Ashley, her phone tucked away for once, held hands with my son, their faces showing the peace that comes with living honestly. As I began to read, I saw Eleanor nodding in understanding, saw members of our storytelling circle leaning forward in recognition. My voice grew stronger with each word, carrying the weight of not just my journey, but the universal story of finding oneself after being lost. I was the woman who gave until she disappeared. I read from the final page. But disappearing taught me how to be found. Not in grand gestures or perfect images, but in quiet moments of truth, in poetry circles and cups of tea, in the courage to walk away and the wisdom to build something new, in the love that exists beyond blood and obligation, in the family we choose and the truth we dare to live. Looking up, I saw tears in Nathan's eyes, a proud smile on Ryan's face, and in Margaret's gentle nod, the understanding that sometimes the longest journey leads us exactly where we need to be. And so, I concluded, closing the notebooks that had guided me home. I learned that the truest love isn't about disappearing into someone else's story. It's about being brave enough to live your own, and generous enough to make room for others to do the same. In the warm applause that followed, I felt the rightness of every decision that had led to this moment. The hard truths, the careful choices, the quiet determination to build something real. It had all created something more beautiful than any carefully curated illusion could ever be. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Give it a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.